You're welcome back to Breakfast Central. The federal government has responded to the Socio-Economic Rights and Accountability Project setup with a pushback against calls to probe an alleged disappearance of 128 billion naira from the Ministry of Power and the Nigerian Bulk Electricity Trading Company, NBET. SIRAP had asked President Bola Tinubu to order an investigation pointing to an audit report that raised red flags about how money was handled in the power sector. But the Ministry of Power says the report relates to 2022, before the current administration came into office and before the Minister Adebayo Adelabu was appointed in August 2023. Is this a tenable excuse by the Ministry of Power? Let's hear from our guest, who is a former Chairman of the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, Dr. Sam Amadi. A warm welcome to you, Dr. Amadi, and thanks for joining us on Breakfast Central once again.
Thank you. Good morning.
Now, Dr. Amadi, does the fact that the alleged missing funds date back to 2022, before this administration started, remove the responsibility of the current administration to investigate, or does accountability transcend administrations? The fact that it didn't happen under this government, does it mean we should just look the other way and go on with business as usual?
Well, thank you for having me again. Accountability does not, begin and end with any administration, but culpability and guilt does. So what the ministry would do, or ought to do, is to provide, because this is a ministry activity, and we talk about systems being transcending each administration. So they inherited the books, they inherited transactions, so they're going to explain what they know from the records, that look, this is actually how the money was spent, this is what actually happened. Yes, if there's now culpability or guilt, then they can escape by saying, well, this corruption or this inefficiency or this error didn't happen while we're there. So the idea here is to exculpate yourself, which is proper, because if you're not there, they couldn't have, maybe exercised oversight. It couldn't have probably stopped whatever corruption took place. But you can account, okay, from our records, this is actually what we have. This is what happened. This is how this money was accounted for or not accounted for. So accountability as explanation of sort of acts or sort of facts is not tied to when I resume. So if you are into an office and there are records of things that happened in the past, you bear responsibility to explain to the public what the records show and what the institutional memory recalls. But you can then say, unfortunately, this is bad, but we're not here, and so I cannot take blame for what I was not in any position to change or to mitigate or ameliorate or stop, prevent. So that's the way it should be, and not to say, you know what, it didn't happen, that was bingo, that's the end.
Well, let's get a clear picture of what some of these accusations are. Now, according to excerpts from the Auditor General's report cited by SIRAP, the Ministry of Power allegedly failed to account for over 4.4 billion naira transferred to the Mambila, Zungeru, and the Kashimbila project accounts with no evidence of how these funds were expended. Then the report also flagged 95.4 billion naira paid to contractors without documentation or proof that the projects were executed, as well as 33.5 million naira spent on foreign travels without approvals from the Secretary to the Government of the Federation or the head of civil service. There are other questionable expenditures that were highlighted, and they were up to over 230 million naira spent on the GIGMIS platform. Then there was also 282 million naira in non-personal advances allegedly exceeding statutory thresholds and multiple payments lacking approvals or supporting records. What does this tell us? The gravity of these allegations, this, the balance, the reports, the lack of balanced reporting we're seeing here from them, or lack of explanation. What does the gravity of these offenses or these accusations tell us about the ministry?
Okay, first, let's start. I used to be chief executive of a major parastatal. So I understand, you see, the essence of, and this is where the system doesn't work. the idea of the general's accounts is that, of course, each department of government has obligation to conduct its own audits and obligation to submit its audit to both the executive branch, the office of the Minister of the Accountant General of the Federation, as well as to the National Assembly for oversight. Now, what our Auditor General does is to come and look at those books and verify, flag payment or transactions that either are not properly supported by documentation or above approval levels, or basically unaccounted for, which is a presumption that they are either fictitious or they are, embezzlement, all kinds of corruption. So the report now forms a basis for multiple action. First, it gives the agency or the person or the ministry the opportunity to provide further evidence and explain. So it's not every item, for example, that necessarily equates to, maybe embezzlement or fraudulent transactions. Some of them can be activities that need to be explained with further documentation. So it triggers the National Assembly's job is to use those reports to request and trigger as oversight response. So come and meet these allegations one by one. And the ministry's job at that point is to provide answers to those questions. They must provide. So the first trigger and the first level of failure is National Assembly that has no incentive, no appetite, and perhaps no knowledge, not enough knowledge about these processes. So they are the ones who will first say, get to do this, explain this to us. So when they now explain, you discover that maybe some of them are explainable. The second issue here is some of these allegations border on possible infringement of the Public Procurement Act and the Financial Services Act, rules of financial conduct in the public sector. So, for example, approvals beyond their level of your, remit, both administrative offenses that can lead to suspension, and firing of civil servants, and also can trigger criminal prosecution for misprocurement. Again, some of them border on maybe frivolous payments. Look at Mambila, for example. It could be a slush fund. It could be allowed to put away government, to steal government funds in the sense that you say we have paid X to Mambila, but I don't prepare there's not enough documentation what was used for. So it calls for an audit of the Mambila, typical of these projects.
All right, let's put a pause on Mambila. We'll go on a very quick break, and when we come back, we'll allow you to complete your thoughts in that regard.
Welcome back. You're still watching Breakfast Central, and we're taking a look at a very, very important story concerning transparency and accountability in Nigeria's power sector. Our guest who's joining us is former chairman of the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, Dr. Sam Amadi, joins us. Thanks for still staying with us after the break. Now, you were talking about the missing funds. Oliver asked a question, and we want you to complete.
I think you particularly stopped at the Mambila project. You were talking about that.
Please go ahead before I have another question for you.
Okay, sure. Thanks for having me back. Okay, so the point I was making is that Mambila has been on the papers for long, and usually these kind of big projects. I remember in Boston, when I was a grad student at Harvard, we used to study about what they call the Big Dig, a massive project that overrun time, deadlines, budgets. And so you get to see that maybe at some point, those projects becomes slush fund, becomes conduits for maybe misappropriating public finance. So with this kind of citation on Mambila, you would expect a National Assembly, the Power Committee, to do a real oversight. So, okay, call in the papers. It's easy. Who approved this? Maybe if I approved. How did the money travel? The money was sent, who received it? Okay, show us what the money is for. By the way, before the ministry would have, it don't just transfer money. There would have been some projects designed, there would have been project implementation phase, and then there would have been some quantified cost, and then you'd have gone to Federal Executive Council, get approval, and then the money in the budget was tagged to it, and then the budget's released, and then you follow procedure and transfer. And the ministry itself will not just transfer money. They don't keep the money. So it will still go through a certain federal government bureaucracy. So the question is, surface all this procedure, then you'll be able to know that maybe this is a simple case of inadequate documentation and everything went well, the projects were executed as planned and budgeted for, or this is a case of money missing and not being used. So essentially, use Mambila to carve out funds. And again, let's not forget, these guys, when the minister said, whoa, we just came to power, he's right. Maybe it wasn't this happened before he became minister or before President Tinubu became president. But this same civil servants, the same director. So it's the institutional continuity also matters for memory as well as for fraud. So it's not just the guys who may have incentive to cover their track are not just the political appointee, the minister, the president, or whoever came with the Tinubu administration, but also civil servants who are always at the heart of any public sector scam or fraudulent project. So yes, you would say, oh, we're not there, but the civil servants were there. The guys who authorized, who approved, who requested, who minuted, who recommended maybe any use of fund are still actors in that sector, in that ministry, or in the bigger government. So it calls for, serious action. And again, the problem with what SERAP does is that it goes to court, it seeks FOI, and then, gets to the media, and then we comment about it. But there's no anchor that touches on execution, sanction. So EFCC is not going to pick this up and run with it. And therefore, there's a gap. So at the end of the day, perhaps not much of the needle is moved by all this.
I mean, you just highlighted that the EFCC will not pick this up. It's quite alarming and quite shocking that there are more than many, or say many cases that the EFCC needs to focus on. But unfortunately, the EFCC isn't doing so. Let's also look at this. Does it bother on the fact that the said 2022 annual report of the Auditor General of the Federation was only published on September 9, 2025? So 2022, 23, 24, 25. So
absolutely,
isn't this a coincidence? And shouldn't this call for a national observation where everyone at this moment, including the Minister of Power, should be able to address Nigerians, and the EFCC, the ICPC, everyone should swoop in and solve this quest?
I agree with you. I mean, that's the problem. Okay, now look, corruption is not just about figuring out individuals and prosecuting them. Corruption is first systemic, it's structural, it's institutional, and the idea is first prevention. And what we learn is publicity is, they say sunshine is security. So if the whole FOI law, now this is the point, the FOI law, the first section of the Federal Information Law is an obligation on the partners of government to upload. So it's not even a request, it's not the first thing. The first is an obligation to upload all vital documents on publicly accessible platform. So think about the FRS French MOU. I even wrote to them, they wrote me, begged me, love letter, please, we are working on it. They don't want to disclose anything. But you don't even need to wait. So this Auditor General report of 2022 should have been up on websites, available to the public, publicized, action taken in 2022. But that's an audit of a year. So let's say 2023, you get, before the end of that year, you take action. While those who are still in authority or who are responsible to answer questions are there. So it tells you something about the institutional, trapping, institutional, opacity, institutional demobilization, that the institutions and the framework to activate anti-corruption are not working. And so, belatedly, 2025, when we are stuck with a different narrative, Sarah now brings this up, and then the people say, oh, we're not there. So, yeah, I agree with you that this is really a story around institutional failure at a peak level and individual failure. So, the system fails, the National Assembly doesn't do its job well. Of course, it has no incentive because there's nothing to gain financially or politically from protecting public finance. The ministry themselves don't care. And it all comes down to just one thing, the character and the direction of the government itself at the highest level. So if the president, the chief of the secretary of government itself is focused on public accountability. When FOI was done, I was NEC as chief executive, and I worked very hard with a few people in the private sector, in the NGO, to force the SGF to create real protocols to trigger. You see, it's not enough to have Freedom of Information Act, public procurement laws, anti-corruption laws. The real thing is the implementation. So you have to look at all the dots and connect them and make each framework activated and activating so that something hits the somewhere, it goes up, the alarm sounds off, somebody picks it up, who has obligation.
Early warning systems.
Exactly, and the obligation is enforceable. So if there's a public officer who has a job to get something past one stage, failure will be spotted and failure will be addressed. But that system is just a dead, a morass of system. We just dump laws, dump frameworks, and they're not connected, and they're not energized, and there are no, oversight in terms of ensuring that they actually do work.
Now, Dr. Sam Amadi, you've spoken quite well, and just before we begin to wrap up on this conversation, Nigerians watching will be wondering that we just started a new tax regime, and they're looking at the Auditor General's report coming in 3 years later. They're looking at the mess that it's unearthed by SERAP, and they're wondering, is this what I'm paying taxes for? There's still gaps when it comes to accountability. As someone who's been chief executive of government parastatal, how important is it for the chief, for the Minister of Power to be focused 100% on the task ahead? And I'm asking this because he's nursing gubernatorial ambitions, and quite a number of people have pointed to the fact that he might be distracted by this. And is it possible that we'll live in a Nigeria where, electricity would not be a pipeline dream, and 24 hours electricity will be a reality?
Well, let me start with the last. I think it's possible. Everything is possible. Apart from God, everything is created. So it's possible. We're going to live in a world where electricity is not electricity is available for all, as you said. But the real challenge is that we can't get there in the mood we are. The problem with hopes and wishes is that wishes are naivety if they are not back to reality. The reality is that there's an input-output ratio. The things we are putting into the system, the lack of transparency, accountability, the ill definition of jobs, and the ill distribution of jobs, and the lack of consequence. Think about the Minister of Power. By now, probably should have been thrown out of his job, not for two reasons. One is his basic idea is to come and be a governor and use the opportunity as a first outing, and in terms of maybe making money or other things, obviously distracted. So if the president really is wants to address power and beyond loyalties or gratitude to people who may have been part of his life story, he will relieve him and put somebody who has the technical capability and attention to pick up, because there are a lot of things to pick up. The power sector is not just about failure around grand ideas. Yes, it matters that we pursue the wrong ideas. And I said that when I was NEC chairman, I said we're going to end up in a crisis. I was harassed for saying not believing in the process, but I've been proved right. So apart from the grand failure in terms of vision, there are a lot of granular activities at high level intensity you need to bring up to pick up every piece. So with due respect to the minister, who may be a very smart guy, accomplished guy, but at this point he lacks that depth as well as the attention to get it done. And so if you look at it, brother, and say, okay, how about what's going on with the FIRS, all these issues and taxes? People have been saying, oh, we're going to pay tax. It's a presumption that, people say, oh, tax is good. We are taught in political economy that taxation is the foundation of statehood, and the capacity of, central authority to collect and administer tax efficiently is kind of a test of its, authority, its bureaucracy that gave rise to the developmental state, because then it measures ability to take care of the people, to penetrate the hinterland and govern. But what we are seeing today is taxing capability minus governing capability. So in many places, people are paying taxes, they're not being provided with responsive governance at federal state level. Nobody lights on, nobody cares, nobody explains. Nobody really struggles to say, can we make this better? So it's going to be double whammy in terms of people are going to be poorer, government's going to have more money, and the more money will result in more theft, because there's no incentive, political incentive to align fiscal buoyancy to strategic investment in human development. No political incentive. So Nigeria, just the idea of Dutch disease, writ large. So Nigeria can have all the money. It can even take all the money from all Nigerian citizens and give it to the state, and you will not have 10% improvement in the quality of governance. So I sum it up as government without governance. So we're going to have also an opportunity. The people will lose, pay more, get less, and the few people in power will probably be richer. And these kind of stories about billions, not accounted for, will continue, because really it's at the heart of the character of political leadership in Nigeria. And until we address that and change that, disrupt that system and recreate a system, we're going to be both in corruption and in very frail electricity grid that continuously fails.
All right, Mr. Sam Amadi, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We'll hope to get some more clarity in this regard, because Nigerians deserve an explanation. It's, we put people there, the people who have been put there to serve Nigerians, and it's only fair that we get clarity in this regard. But thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you so much.